there was a YouTube interview with former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, that has been going around and around. I don't think I've ever seen more headlines pulled from one single interview. Every time I tune into Eric, I've read his book, The Age of AI, listened to roundtable interviews with him. He has some pretty insightful things to say about what's coming our way with the future of where AI is headed. In this video, I'm going to break it down for you. I'm going to give you the highlights from this interview, some of the most important, if not somewhat shocking statements. However, for those of us that see that AGI and ASI are on the horizon, it shouldn't be that shocking. That said, I've watched this interview, pulled the most important pieces out, and I'm going to share those with you in today's video. Let's jump into it. Okay, so the first clip I'm going to share with you is a statement I don't think enough tech leaders are saying. In fact, many of them say the opposite. There's this belief out there that we should give machines citizenship one day, the same level of equal rights we give humans. I am just not on board with that. I think that's when we become far too dependent on the machines and we create literally unsafe scenarios. That said, I'm still a huge optimist. I believe that we should harness the machines and the capabilities within them to make major first moves in the next 12 months, because that is when we're going to see this timeline divide the non-adapters or the hobbyist prompters from the serious AI implementers. And those are the people with the first movers advantage. All right, so Eric Schmidt said that he is in favor of free speech for humans. He always has been. He is not in favor of free speech for machines. He said that there needs to be some room for us to allow for liability from harm from these machines due to cyber attacks, autonomous weaponry gone wrong. Here's a little clip where he talks about it.
People who are absolutist on free speech, which I happen to agree with, but they confuse free speech of an individual versus free speech for a computer. I am strongly in favor of free speech for every human. I am not in favor of free speech for computers. And the algorithms are not necessarily optimizing the best thing for humanity. And we're also going to have to change some of the laws, for example, Section 230, to allow for liability in the worst possible cases. So when someone is harmed from this technology, we need to have a solution to prevent further harm.
So the second highlight for me is whenever Eric talked about how the world is not ready. I believe this is true to such a large extent. If you're a business owner, if you lead a marketing team and you don't have bots set up that are talking to each other, that are iterating on each other, literally, we have agentic behavior right now. We don't have to wait for agents inside streamlined, connected processes. If that's not how you're thinking, you will be left behind. Along with what he said about the world's not ready for this, Eric also said that he believes the decisions on the future shouldn't just come from the tech people. Hits home to me because I believe that it's going to take the creatives, the artists, the non-technical people to help us envision a beautiful future for humanity with the capabilities that are in our hands right now, and will just get stronger and better. Here's the clip where Eric talks about this.
Well, the world is full of stories about what AI can do, and we generally agree with those. What we believe, however, is the world is not ready for this. I personally believe that this will happen much, much more quickly than societies are ready for, including in the United States and China. It's happening very fast.
Okay, the third notable highlight, and yes, a breakdown on China and AI is coming, so hold tight. But the third notable highlight for me was when the host asked Eric with somewhat of a doom and gloom point of view. I find this very common in people that have been through a long lifespan and seen a lot and have been on the receiving end of so much programming in TV, film, and media that we have been fed over the years about this Skynet picture of what AI could be. So it's not uncommon, but the host asked Eric basically, what are all the things that can go wrong with AI becoming superhuman? And Eric said, hold up before we talk about all the things that can go wrong, because yeah, there's definitely some scary scenarios where AI, especially in warfare, could be applied in a very unsafe way. But hold on, before we talk about that, let's talk about the abundance that's coming. And Eric hit on how life itself will change, how science will have the most incredible breakthroughs we will ever have seen, how the way we drive a car will completely change. And he said we're going to have way more productivity, which is something I personally am so excited about. As a business owner, a marketer for 12 years, I am in the middle of high growth businesses. I am so thrilled with the idea of creative people being able to escape burnout and literally download their brains into bots that can be deployed instead of humans. So we as humans can step away from all this crazy doing that has just overwhelmed us because the doing keeps growing and growing as the work demands keep growing. It's a typical side effect. But now, if bots and agentic behaviors in AI can be trained to take over most of that work, I'm talking a right now world, not a future world, we can get back to being a human being and doing the things we love. We can have, like Eric said, way more productivity, but not at the cost of more humans burning themselves out, working late, missing time with family, etc. He also talked about how we're going to be able to have a universal doctor and a universal educator, which is this idea I've talked about in other videos and will continue to talk about. AI outperforming doctors and educators, AI outperforming doctors and teachers. And when you think about it, those professions abide by a ton of outdated rules and metrics. Humanity can't really overturn all the rules and rewrite them overnight. If AI can come in and do the measurements, pull from billions of data points and do a better job than most humans, that is something beautiful. That is something to put in the right place and to harness so that we and our kids can benefit. So here's a clip where Eric talks about this.
There are many things to worry about. Before we say the bad things, let me remind you enormous improvements in drug capability for healthcare, solutions to climate change, better vehicles, huge discoveries in science, greater productivity for kind of everyone, a universal doctor, a universal educator. All of these things are coming. And those are fantastic. A long way you come with because these are very powerful, especially in the hands of an evil person, and we know evil exists. These systems can be used to harm large numbers of people. The most obvious one is their use in biology. Can these systems at some point in the future generate biological pathogens that could harm many, 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 many humans? Today, we're quite sure they can't, but there's a lot of people who think that they will be able to unless we take some action. Those actions are being worked on now. What about cyber attacks? You have a lone actor, a terrorist group, North Korea, whomever, whatever your evil person or group is, and they decide to take down the financial system using a previously unknown attack vector, so called zero day exploits. So the systems are so powerful that we are quite concerned that in addition to democracies using them for gains, dictators will use them to aggregate power, and they'll be used in a harmful and military context.
I'm freaked out about these AI girlfriends. I feel as if the biggest threat in the US right now is loneliness that leads to extremism. And I see these AI girlfriends and AI searches popping up, and I see a lot of young men who have a lack of romantic or economic opportunities turning to AI girlfriends and begin to sequester from real relationships. And they become less likely to believe in climate change, more likely to engage in misogynistic content, sequester from school, their parents, work. In some, they become really shitty citizens. And I think young men are having so much trouble that this low risk entry into these faux relationships is just going to speedball loneliness and the externalities of loneliness. Your thoughts?
I completely agree. There's lots of evidence that there's now a problem with young men. In many cases, the path to success for young men has been, shall we say, been made more difficult because they're not as educated as the women are now. Remember, there are more women in college than men, and many of the traditional paths are no longer as available. And so they turn to the online world for enjoyment and sustenance, but also because of the social media algorithms, they find like minded people who ultimately radicalize them either in a horrific way like terrorism or in the kind of way that you're describing, where they're just maladjusted. Um, this is a good example of an unexpected problem of existing technology. So now imagine that the AI girlfriend or boyfriend, but let's use AI girlfriend as an example, is perfect, perfect visually, perfect emotionally. And the AI girlfriend, in this case, captures your mind as a man to the point where she or whatever it is takes over the way you're thinking. You're obsessed with her. That kind of obsession is possible, especially for people who are not fully formed. Parents are going to have to be more involved for all the obvious reasons. But at the end of the day, parents can only control what their sons and daughters are doing within reason. We've ended up, again, using teenagers as an example. We have all sorts of rules about age of maturity, 16, 18, what have you, 21 in some cases. And yet you put a 12 or 13-year-old in front of one of these things, and they have access to every evil as well as every good in the world, and they're not ready to take it. So I think the general question of, are you mature enough to handle it, sort of the general version of your AI girlfriend example, is unresolved.
All right, here's the big takeaway: China and AI.
If there's a number two, and maybe you think we're not the number one, but assuming you think that the US is number one in this, who is the number two? Who do you think poses the biggest threat? Is it their technology or their intentions or both? If you were to hear that one of these really awful things took place, who would you think most likely are the most likely actors behind it? Is it a rogue state? Is it a terrorist group? Is it a nation state?
First place, I think that the short-term threats are from rogue states and from terrorism. And because there, as we know, there's plenty of groups that seek harm against the elites in any country. Today, the competitive environment is very clear that the US, with our partner UK, I'll give you an example. This week, there were two libraries from China that were released, open source. One is a problem solver that's very powerful, and another one is a large language model that's equal, and in some cases exceeds the one from Meta, with which they use every day. It's called Llama 3, 400 billion. I was shocked when I read this because I had assumed that in my conversation with the Chinese, that they were 2 to 3 years late. It looks to me like it's within a year now. So it'd be fair to say it's the US and then China within a year's time. Everyone else is well behind. Now, I'm not suggesting that China will launch a rogue attack against an American city, but I am alleging that it's possible that a third party could steal from China because it's open source, or from the US if they're malevolent, and do that. So the threat escalation matrix goes up with every improvement. Now, today, the primary use of these tools is to sow misinformation, which is what you talked about. But remember that there's a transition to agents, and the agents do things. So it's a travel agent or it's, whatever. And the agents speak English, that you give them English and they respond in English. So you can concatenate them. You can literally put agent one talks to agent two, talks to agent three, talks to agent four. And there's a scheduler that makes them all work together. And so, for example, you could say to these agents, design me the most beautiful building in the world. Go ahead and file all the permits, negotiate the fees of the builders, and tell me how much it's going to cost, and tell my accountant that I need that amount of money. That's the command. So think about that. Think about the agency, the ability to put an integrated solution that today takes 100 people who are very talented, and you can do it by one command. So that acceleration of power could also be misused. I'll give you another example. You were talking earlier about the impact on social media. I saw a demonstration in England, in fact. The first command was build a profile of a woman who's 25, she has two kids, and she has the following strange beliefs. And the system wrote the code and created a fake persona that existed on that particular social media case. Then the next command was take that person and modify that person into every possible stereotype, every race, sex, so forth and so on, age, demographic thing, with similar views, and populate that. And 10,000 people popped up just like that. So if you wanted, for example, today, this is true today, if you wanted to create a community of 10,000 fake influencers to say, for example, that smoking doesn't cause cancer, which, as we know, is not true, you could do it. And one person with a PC can do this. Imagine when the AIs are far, far more powerful than they are today.
So Eric said that China is catching up beyond belief to what the US is doing. Currently, the US is leading in AI and automation, but China isn't far behind. It went from being around 2 to 3 years behind us to being less than 1 year. A real-time example of this is the Chinese LLM called DeepSeek. They just released R1 Lite preview, which is very much a clone of OpenAI's O1 preview, the model that has reasoning baked in. Except instead of calling it test time compute, DeepSeek calls it thought tokens. I took DeepSeek for a test run. Here's an email I wrote with very little prompting, asked it to write in my style. It didn't do a terrible job. For comparison, here's an email I asked O1 with reasoning to write shortly after I prompted DeepSeek. There's a slight difference here, but not that much. However, that said, I still prefer the O1 ChatGPT OpenAI's model. It's a little bit better, a little bit more well written, a little bit more deeply structured. But this content still isn't ready for publishing. I would actually train a GPT bot on my style, the products I sell, the audience I have, and create a super dialed in email. O1 preview was released September 12th. DeepSeek's R1 was released November 20th. So pretty soon after OpenAI released their latest model. And in the benchmarks of DeepSeek R1 Lite preview, they stacked up pretty well, even outperforming O1. But here's the thing. I've read some books by Chinese billionaires and tech investors, Dr. Kai-Fu Lee's AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. Don't get scared by the title. It's actually a very good read. While I am a rabbit hole thinker, I don't think it's that healthy to read from too many anonymous Reddit or X threads and get too caught up in conspiracy theories. I prefer to read from people who have been there and done that. Dr. Kai-Fu Lee was raised in China, has invested in Chinese tech. What's funny is in this book, he identifies that the Chinese are imitators. They are not original creators. They imitate what the best country is doing, and they literally kind of swipe, aka plagiarize. Not that great of a value system, but that's how China operates, so we really shouldn't be surprised. In this clip I'm going to share next, you're going to hear Eric talk about how surprised he is with how China is catching up more and more rapidly, but how that's going to shift because of the Trump administration, which he said Trump's view is all about decoupling the US from China. This could give America back its major advantage, where it's not just a month or two ahead, but back to a couple of years. But then it comes down to, well, who is OpenAI allowing on their board? And that's a whole nother topic. But go ahead and listen to this clip from Eric where he talks about the state of US versus China in the AI arms race.
We're going to figure out a way to trust each other on this issue, and we're going to fight the bad guys together on this stuff. Your thoughts?
So Dr. Kissinger, of course, was the world's expert in China. He opened up China, which is one of his greatest achievements. And but he was also a proud American. And he understood that China could go one way or the other. His view on China was that China, and he wrote a whole book on this, was that China wanted to be the middle kingdom as part of their history, where they'd sort of dominated all the other countries. But it's not like America. His view was they wanted to make sure the other countries would show fealty to China, and in other words, do what they wanted. And occasionally, if they didn't do something, China would then extract some payment, such as invading the country. That's roughly what Henry would say. So he was very much a realist about China as well. His view would be at odds today with Trump's view and the U.S. government's. The U.S. government is completely organized today around decoupling. That is literally separating. And his view, which I can report accurately because I went to China with him, was that we're never going to be great friends, but we have to learn how to coexist. And that means detailed discussions on every issue at great length to make sure that we don't alarm each other or frighten each other. His further concern was not that President Xi would wake up tomorrow and invade Taiwan, but that you would start with an accident and then there would be an escalatory ladder. And that because the emotions on both sides, you'd end up just like in World War I, which started with a shooting in Sarajevo, that ultimately people found in a few months that they were in a world war that they did not want and did not expect. And once you're in the war, you have to fight. So the concern with China would be roughly that we are codependent and we're not best friends. Being dependent is probably better than being completely independent, that is non-dependent, because it forces some level of understanding and communication.
So those to me were some of the biggest highlights. Some of the other things that Eric addressed was the potential spread of a lot of misinformation where we're going to have influencers cloned, their likeness, their voice. It's going to be hard to tell them apart from real people. And that's going to be used to spread a lot of disinformation. What's surprising to me is that we haven't seen this on a mass scale already when you have platforms like Synthesia capable of fully cloning the likeness of a celebrity nearly perfectly. But instead, there's a lot of healthy collaborations happening, like this one with Lays and Messi, where Messi was actually hired and paid to stand in front of a green screen, have Synthesia clone him, go through the process of capturing the photo and the video to do that, and then creating what was a deepfake ad, but totally approved by Messi. So that is the other side of this. There is a good side, and in that deepfake ad campaign, they were able to generate content that they never could have done if they only had the human Messi and not the cloning capabilities. They were able to have him speak in 9 different languages. So yeah, while there is a lot of bad and a lot of danger and a lot of potential misuse, I do believe that the world's default is abundance. Hope and good wins in the end. We see this in the cycles of almost every government. Hitler only ruled for 4 years. How long has that world been around? Yeah, we've had evil dictators, but they've never lasted. And I am with Eric when he says that it's not just the tech people that should be building the rules, the regulations, and I would also add the education for the public about what this is and what we are looking at, which is a weapon for abundance, an open door for us to escape burnout. But for sure, we need a balanced approach where we do have guardrails, where ideally China isn't swiping ideas 2 months after America publishes them. And we have decoupled from what could be dangerous organization. And I am hopeful that the next 2 years we're going to see more healthy forward directions there. And if you're watching this video, congrats, you are tackling a hefty topic, the future of how AI and automation will shape our lives, not just our lives, but our kids, our families, the next generation, the world at large. And this is something we as a collective, as a human race, need to be thinking about. We need to get ready in our businesses, in our workplaces, in our families, in every sphere that we operate in. When we harness it, that is when we get ahead of what's coming. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe to my channel here on YouTube at Julie McCoy. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Be sure to drop your thoughts on the future of all of this. What are your thoughts on what Eric said? Do you agree? Do you disagree? This is a place for all of those discussions. And as always, I will see you down the next rabbit hole.